Commercial diving is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, where trust in your equipment and employer can mean the difference between life and death. Today, we explore two horrifying incidents where that trust was shattered. The 1979 Wildrake diving incident, where two divers were trapped in a malfunctioning bell, and the 1983 Byford Dolphin disaster, where an explosive decompression tore through a diving chamber, killing 4 men in an instant. These are stories of bravery, tragedy, and the devastating consequences when safety fails. In August 1979, two commercial divers descended into the depths of the North Sea, tasked with repairing a critical oil facility. But what began as a routine dive turned into a nightmare when their diving bell became trapped at 160 meters below the surface. This is the story of the Wildrake diving incident, a tragedy that shocked the industry and changed commercial diving forever. The Wildrake diving accident took place in the East Shetland Basin of the North Sea, a region known for its harsh conditions and lucrative oil fields. In 1977, a single anchor leg mooring SALM system was installed in the Thistle oil field to facilitate oil tanker loading. By 1979, the SALM buoy had become partially disconnected from its riser, and British National Oil Corporation (BNOC) hired Infabco Diving Services to repair it. Infabco, a relatively new diving company, had secured the contract under controversial circumstances, with allegations of bribery and favoritism swinging around its founder, Brian Masterson. The MS Wildrake, a Norwegian diving support vessel, was equipped with a state-of-the-art saturation diving system designed by Molrodden AS. In preparation for the SALM repair, Infabco made several modifications to the Wildrake's diving system. The clump weight, a critical safety feature that served as a backup recovery system, was removed to allow the bell to be launched over the side of the ship. The bell's drop weights, another secondary recovery system, were lashed to the frame with nylon rope to prevent accidental release. These changes, while intended to improve efficiency, would prove fatal. On the night of August 7, 1979, Richard Walker and Victor Guille, two experienced American divers, entered the Wildrake diving bell for what was supposed to be a routine dive. The two men had been in saturation since July 29th, living in the Wildrake's pressurized living quarters to avoid the need for decompression between dives. Their task was to reattach the SALM buoy to its base at a depth of 485 feet or 148 meters. As the bell was lowered into the water, its transponder, a critical piece of equipment for tracking its position, came loose. The deck foreman was ordered to cut it off, leaving the bell without a means of communication or location tracking. At 2:20 a.m. on August 8th, disaster struck. The diving bell became separated from its main lift wire and was left hanging by its life support umbilical. Walker, who had been working outside the bell, quickly re-entered and sealed the inner hatch. The bottom hatch, which opened outward, was left open and secured to the bell frame. The Wildrake's dive superintendent, Peter Holmes, and dive supervisor, Brian Reed, believed the umbilical cord could be used to recover the bell. However, this was not its intended purpose, and the umbilical cord was not certified for bell recovery. When Reed attempted to raise the bell, the umbilical became jammed in the davit's wheel, severing power and hot water to the bell. The divers were now stranded in complete darkness, with no heat and no way to communicate. The diving vessel Stena Welder arrived to assist, but its diving system was undergoing repairs and had to be hastily prepared for the rescue. Rather than using the Stena Welder's crane, Holmes and Matterson decided to recover the bell with the Wildrake's crane. This required rescue divers to attach a guide wire to the bell, which would then be used to send the crane hook down. However, this operation was plagued by delays and miscommunications. The Stena Welder's diving bell lights failed, and the Wildrake crew had forgotten they had moved the bell away from the SALM base earlier, making it nearly impossible to locate. At 7:55 a.m., rescue diver Phil Casey Smith finally located the Wildrake bell. Through the porthole, he saw Walker and Guille giving him a thumbs up, but their movements were frantic. Casey Smith spent over an hour directing the recovery of a guide wire, but the Stena Welder's lack of dynamic positioning meant the bell dragged him around at the seabed. At 10:10 a.m., he successfully attached the slings to the Wildrake bell, but the rescue was far from over. The Wildrake attempted to lift the bell at a 45-degree angle, but the bell became wedged against the SALM base, causing the sling to break. The bell was lost again, and by the time rescue diver Eddie Frank located it, Walker and Guiel were near death. One of the divers had attempted to cut the ropes on the drop weights to allow the bell to surface, but only one weight was freed. At 7:37 p.m., the bell was finally recovered, but it was too late. Walker and Guiel had succumbed to hypothermia, their bodies lifeless in the freezing darkness. The Wildrake accident sent shockwaves through the diving industry. Investigations revealed multiple safety violations, including the removal of the clump weight and the absence of a bell stage, which would have kept the hatch clear of the seabed. The accident also exposed the controversial relationship between Infabco and BNOC, with allegations of bribery and favoritism tainting the case. In the years that followed, the families of Walker and Guiel fought for justice, but the legal battles were fraught with challenges. Infabco avoided criminal liability by claiming the divers were employed by an offshore company, and the compensation awarded to the families was never fully enforced. However, the tragedy led to significant safety reforms in the diving industry, ensuring that such a disaster would never happen again. However, just 4 years after the Wildrake tragedy, another diving disaster rocked the North Sea. This time, it wasn't a diving bell trapped at the depths. It was an explosive decompression that tore through a diving chamber, killing 4 divers and 1 tender in an instant. This is the story of the Byford Dolphin accident, one of the most horrifying diving disasters in history. The Byford Dolphin was a semi-submersible drilling rig operating in the North Sea, primarily in the Norwegian sector. Built in 1974, it was one of the most advanced rigs of its time, capable of drilling up to depths of 6.1 kilometers or 3.8 miles, and operating in waters up to 460 meters or 1,500 feet deep. The rig was equipped with a saturation diving system, allowing divers to live and work at extreme depths for extended periods. But on November 5, 1983, a catastrophic failure in the system would lead to one of the deadliest diving accidents ever recorded. At 4 a.m. on November 5, 1983, 4 divers were inside the Byford Dolphin's diving chamber system, which consisted of 2 pressurized chambers connected to a diving bell via a short passage called a trunk. The divers, Edward Coward, Roy Lucas, Bjorn Bergersen, and Truls Hellevik, had just completed a dive and were in the process of decompressing. Coward and Lucas were resting in Chamber 2 at a pressure of 9 atmospheres, while Bergersen and Hellevik had just entered Chamber 1 after exiting the diving bell. The 2 dive tenders, William Cramond and Martin Saunders, were stationed outside the chambers, responsible for operating the system. The normal procedure for disconnecting the diving bell involves several critical steps: closing the bell door, slightly increasing the pressure to seal it, closing the Chamber 1 door, slowly depressurizing the trunk, and finally opening the clamp to separate the bell from the chamber system. However, on this fateful morning, something went terribly wrong. Before Hellevik could close the Chamber 1 door, the clamp sealing the trunk was prematurely opened. The result was an explosive decompression, as the pressurized air inside the chambers rushed out with unimaginable force. The decompression was instantaneous and catastrophic. The pressure inside the chambers dropped from 9 atmospheres to 1 atmosphere in a fraction of a second, creating a force so powerful that it tore through the system. The trunk door was forced open, jamming the interior hatch and creating a crescent-shaped opening. Truls Hellevik, who was closest to the opening, was instantly killed. His body was bisected at the thoraco-abdominal cavity, and his internal organs were ejected through its opening, landing 10 meters or 30 feet above the chamber. The other divers, Coward, Lucas, and Bergersen, were also killed, their bodies found in the positions they had been in the moment of the decompression. Dive tender William Cramen was struck by the flying diving bell and killed, while Martin Saunders was severely injured. The post-mortem examinations revealed the horrifying effects of explosive decompression. The divers' blood had essentially boiled, causing fat to precipitate out and clog their arteries and organs. This fat, now insoluble, stopped their circulation almost instantly. Hellevik's body was the most severely affected, with forensic pathologists describing his injuries as gross dismemberment. The force of the decompression had literally torn him apart. The official investigation concluded that the accident was caused by human error, specifically the dive tender's decision to open the clamp before the trunk was fully depressurized. However, many question this conclusion, pointing to the outdated design of the Byford Dolphin's diving system. The system lacked fail-safe mechanisms, such as interlocking seals and outboard pressure gauges, which would have prevented the trunk from being opened while under pressure. Critics also highlighted the poor communication system, which relied on a megaphone in a noisy environment, and the long working hours that may have contributed to the fatigue. The families of the victims and former crew members accused the investigation of being a cover-up. They claimed that the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate had authorized suspensions on vital safety equipment, including the lack of interlocking mechanisms, which played a direct role in the accident. Despite these allegations, no one was ever held criminally responsible. The families eventually received compensation from the Norwegian government, but it took 26 years for them to ever see any form of justice. The Byford Dolphin accident led to significant changes in diving safety protocols. New regulations required fail-safe seals, interlocking mechanisms, and improved communication systems for all diving bells. However, the rig itself continued to operate for decades, plagued by further incidents, including a fatal industrial accident in 2002. It was finally scrapped in 2019, but the memory of the 1983 disaster remains a stark reminder of the dangers of underwater exploration.